everybody, recently celebrating the 1-year anniversary of his administration, Mayor Brandon Johnson and Chief Financial Officer Jill Jaworski. Please give it up.
Come on, yo, keep clapping up for Jill. Give it up for Jill. Come on.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can everybody hear us okay? Perfect. So some of you actually got to see us have one of these chats, a lakeside chat, a number of months ago at the Bond Buyer Conference. And I think we have a little bit more time today. And we asked ahead of time of all the investors who were here if they wanted to submit questions. And we got quite a number of folks who submitted questions. We're not going to be able to ask them all, but we have, the questions we have, I think were all submitted by investors. So we really are trying to address the things people want to hear about and not shy away from any of the tough subjects. Mayor, do you want to say anything before we start, or should we dive right in?
Well, first of all, let me just say good afternoon to everyone. And Jill, thank you again for your leadership and for helping us have these type of exchanges. This is an important dialogue, not just for the city of Chicago, but really for the globe. It is an impressive time in our nation's history. With all of the challenges that we are experiencing right now, we are clearly positioned and poised as this generation to do right by this moment and set up future generations for the type of economic prosperity that we desperately deserve. So in the midst of crisis, I'll always see opportunity, and I'm very excited about the engagement of what we are now branding as lakeside chats. We don't have fireside chats in Chicago. We have a lakeside chat, so I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
Wonderful. Let's just jump right in. We tried to put these in sort of a logical order, but there's a whole bunch of different topics that people wanted to address. So we'll start with one of the topics you spent a lot of time talking about the last year, which is the migrant crisis. One of the things that we were asked is for an understanding of how does the city coordinating with the county, the state, and to deal with the migrant crisis, and what are some of the challenges that we are continuing to experience as migrants continue to seek Chicago out as a destination?
Well, let me just first of all start off by saying, that this is a global challenge. This is an international a crisis that really requires the full force of government at every single level. Unfortunately, we have not seen that, but just to offer up some context, when Mayor Harold Washington, the first black mayor in the history of Chicago, was elected, before he became the mayor, he was a congressional leader, he was a congressperson. He happened to serve during the time in which President Reagan was in charge. During the 80s, of course, pardon me, you all, I'm a social studies teacher, so if I just nerd out for a second, just be patient, because I think it's important to establish the context. So at the time, President Reagan was very focused in on the eradication of what he saw was the threat for the globe, which was communism. Now, there was a particular region at the time, Russia, where communism was front and center. However, there were places around the world that President Reagan and the federal leadership at the time saw training grounds, if you will, of regimes in which communism could spread. That was Central and South America. The whole history around Iran-Contra, and then America funding these arms groups to dismantle these political threats, right? And some of the terrorists of today were individuals that were actually invested in to fight communism a generation ago. Well, when Mayor Harold Washington saw the impact of federal policy around the globe, he understood the threat to the innocent people in these various countries and how that would impact them. That is the motivation behind Mayor Harold Washington declaring Chicago a sanctuary city. That if disruption were to take place in Central and South America, Mayor Harold Washington, the first black mayor in the history of Chicago, said, "We will be a sanctuary for these families." And then, of course, fast forward now to today, the looming threat ostensibly are these socialist regimes, right? Where the supply of oil and goods and services are there's a fight over them, right? Sanctions are promulgated on these various sovereign nations, and as a result, there's disruption in their particular regions. Okay, so you'll be tested on that. There'll be a short answer question for that. So here we are today now, where Venezuela in particular, they have the largest oil reserves in the history of the country, of the world right now. 58% of their economy is contingent upon oil. These sanctions have forced migration all over the globe. Also, just some context, I'll close with this, that you are seeing the type of disruption that's forcing migration all over the globe. So Mayor Eric Adams, for instance, 70% of those who are seeking asylum, migrants who are headed to New York, are from the continent of Africa. The European Union took them 5 years to negotiate how to settle migrants in the entire region. So now where does that leave the city of Chicago? Because of the irresponsibility of the federal government, particularly Congress, and more specifically, the Republican Party refusing to negotiate with the Senate as well as President Biden, you have this disruption in flow. And now Governor Abbott is determined to score political points by forcing people to regions of the country that are not necessarily places where these Venezuelans in particular have community. And so what has that looked like? When I was sworn into office last year, we literally had women and children sleeping on floors in police districts, airports, setting up camps all outside districts. It was absolute chaos. Here's what we've done. There are no individuals sleeping on floors in police districts. We have cleared the airports. We have saved the taxpayers over $200 million by virtue of renegotiating the contracts that were bloated that I inherited with the good work of my budget director. The ultimate thing that I want people to understand about Chicago and this migrant mission, there are challenges that we're facing with, right? Bringing the state together, the county together, the federal government to support this mission, and the state and the county have been good partners. And there is a real opportunity to grow our workforce. If the federal government provided work permits for these individuals who are seeking asylum, it will put them on a pathway to long-term economic sustainability. St. Louis, 300,000 people in St. Louis. They have capacity for 800,000. Same thing for Kansas City. Same thing for the city of Chicago. Believe it or not, no matter how congested it feels, we conservatively can fit 700,000 more residents in the city of Chicago. I'm saying all that to say that even with the international crisis that local municipalities are being asked to manage, that's unprecedented. The city of Chicago has been a model for the rest of the country of how you build an operation that's responsible around people's humanity. We've done that in less than a year, where we've created an operation where people are being resettled, we're educating children, people are on their way to sustainability in terms of workforce. However, with all that being said, this mission is not sustainable without the help of the federal government. It's not. But I'm grateful to the mutual aid, faith community, the philanthropic community, the business community that has stepped up in this time. It's an opportunity for us to show the rest of the world what a true welcoming center can be like, and how investments in a place like Chicago with a growing workforce has an opportunity to explode our economy. So in other words, I'm very optimistic despite these challenges.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. I think that, the press has been, focused a lot on the negative aspects of the migrant mission and how is the city going to be able to handle it. And, what we see, what I see working with all the individuals in the administration who are focused on this is the focus on, we had to stand up a lot of shelters quickly. How do we find the best ones, the ones that operate the most efficiently, that deliver services the best, keep those. Identify the ones that are not working so well, get rid of those, renegotiate the contracts, as you said, try to find the way to deliver the mission in a humanitarian way, but also managing our cost structure.
And fiscally responsible as well. Look, that's the ongoing challenge. We've met it. It hasn't stopped us from making critical investments in other areas, which I'm happy to get into. But you're absolutely right, Jill, that bringing the state and the county into this conversation and continuing to push our federal government to react in this moment. That's what my leadership has brought to this moment. And again, I'm grateful for the full force of government being on display, whether it's our public education system, our city colleges, our faith community, the philanthropic community, all of us stepping up together to respond to this international global crisis in which a local municipality is asked to set up and establish, which is unprecedented.
Absolutely. Do you think there could be a change in federal policies based on the upcoming election?
I just said I was optimistic. And then you asked that question. You know, look, there was a bipartisan agreement in the Senate. There was, working with President Biden for real substantive immigration reform policy. The last time we had real transformation in terms of immigration reform, the last two times, one, I was in high school, the one before that, I think the Bears were the Super Bowl champions. You know, I said, did Kevin leave? I didn't want to traumatize him. He's working on that part. And, but look, it is unfortunate that, you know, we have the politics that we do have today, where instead of working collaboratively, you know, there's this, I don't know, attractiveness about being divisive. One of the things that we did in Chicago, I don't know if you all are aware of this, but we passed a bus ordinance that pretty much would prohibit buses from arriving to Chicago unannounced. We never said that the buses could not arrive. We just said you have to coordinate with us. Governor Abbott refused to coordinate with our local municipality, with the city of Chicago. And now he's sending buses to the suburbs outside of the city of Chicago. He is not interested in a coordinated effort to respond to this crisis. The crisis at the border is real. You know, there's no dispute of that. But to only send buses to 3 cities, Chicago, New York, and Denver, that has been his primary focus. And it is not only irresponsible, but it could disrupt lives unnecessarily, right? And so that's why, again, I'm very happy with the work that we've done to bring stakeholders together, to create a budget that's centered around people's humanity, and also recognizing that there are some limitations to what we can do as a municipality.
Yep. One of the other questions that we got was about the Bring Chicago Home initiative. You know, the referendum, which didn't pass, would have raised the transfer tax on properties over $1 million. The question is, do you plan to resurrect that policy, or resurrect that proposal, or look at other sources of revenue?
Well, it's, first of all, the unhoused crisis in Chicago is real. Conservatively, 70,000 people without homes in Chicago, of which 70% of them are black families. 1 in 5 black children who attend our public schools will experience the unfortunate experience of being unhoused. This is also a global phenomenon, quite frankly. I've had some time with the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass. She's dealing with this. Atlanta, Andre Dickens is dealing with this. Mayor Eric Adams in New York is dealing with this. You know, everywhere where there are a larger population, that this is a challenge. You know, in Chicago in particular, it's unfortunate that previous administrations begin to divest in public housing in particular. And that has certainly created the type of instability that we are experiencing. And so in my first budget, with the work of, again, my budget director and our full team, we committed $250 million to fight the housing crisis. I'm very happy that even though Bring Chicago Home referendum did not go our way, I'm very happy that we were able to pass our bonds deal, a $1.25 billion bond. I hear you, investors. A $1.25 billion bond that's going to allow us to build homes, to create more affordable homes, as well as to spur economic development, while also addressing our public infrastructure as a whole. You know, as far as the resurrection of any idea, I'll just say it very plainly, because that's the only way in which I know how to speak. If we want a better, stronger, safer Chicago, we have to invest in people. It is just that simple. And whether it's the Bring Chicago Home referendum, or the bond, or the corporate fund that we are using to address the unhoused crisis that we have, We have to use multiple tools to address this issue. We're talking years, decades of disinvestment. Again, I'm going to nerd out just again, when Al Raby, who was a social studies teacher like myself, invited Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King to Chicago, he invited him here because of the housing crisis. It was impossible for families to find stability. And we're talking an entire generation ago now. And the same Al Raby who invited Dr. King to Chicago was the person who was the campaign manager for Mayor Harold Washington as he fought to bring equity as it relates to housing in this city. And even with the real estate transfer tax, the one that was being proposed was still significantly smaller than Los Angeles and New York. In fact, 93% of homeowners with this transfer tax would have received a tax reduction. Now, in 1996, Cook County Board President John Strozier attempted to raise the real estate transfer tax. The industry went at him pretty hard, and he never even got a chance to vote on it with the County Board of Commissioners. And then the industry took it one step further. They went to Springfield and said that it cannot be considered but by ballot referendum, as well as the executive could not advocate for it if it were to be a question on the ballot. So it really tied our hands, at least in that instance. But, as true Chicagoans, it's important that my leadership offers up a variety of lanes in which we can step into to be able to address the crisis of affordable homes. So we're not done, and we certainly are not discouraged. And I'm very much encouraged that there are people who recognize the value of the bond deal and are prepared and willing to help make sure that those investments actually reach the people who have been harmed the most.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges of that is, we saw some commentary that it was a referendum on, the willingness of Chicagoans to pay more taxes, and I think, the outcome of the referendum was determined by many different things, and it was very close. It only lost by a hair, and the industry lobbying was incredibly high. And we had a court case that said it was invalid and wasn't reversed until right before the election. So I think you look back and it's like, how can you look with all those factors and say this is a referendum on the city's policies? I don't think we can say that. I think it was a referendum that the outcome was based on the circumstances, not the quality of the proposal, and not Chicago's willingness to support these initiatives.
I absolutely agree with that. And, what's important for me is that we continue to center people in this debate. And look, I understand that as mayor of the city of Chicago, there's an attractiveness about covering wins and losses based upon a politician. The fact of the matter is, we still have 70,000 people that are documented who are unhoused in this city. We have a number of children in particular who are experiencing homelessness right now. If people are committed to a better, stronger, safer Chicago, they have to lean in and provide solutions, valuable solutions, and not just opposition to what we are proposing to actually address the crisis. For too long in this city, it's been an us versus them, a them versus us. I'm working to build a better, stronger, safer Chicago with we. We have to take some responsibility on the fact that we've had failed policies that have caused these conditions. Not one crisis in this city right now that I inherited that I caused. Not one. But the will of the people have made it very clear a year ago when they wanted to go in a different direction. The first mayor in the last 40 years that's been elected that was not tied to any sort of political machine. That was no regular precinct captain. It didn't have a legacy. They voted for an organizer and a Cook County commissioner because the people of Chicago recognize that the way of the old has failed us. And so now it's time for us to press forward and then to use this opportunity to address these critical issues and to be a model for the rest of the world.
One of the things that's, that reminds me of is, we've talked about this before, is we just had the panel on here that was talking about how positive the business environment is in Chicago, and how good the city is to work with on development and how great the opportunities are, your critics look at you as a progressive and think you're anti-business. But I want you to talk a little bit about some of the successes that you've had in your time this year. Paid time off, minimum wage for tip workers. Some people think these are anti-business, but I think the perspective is that being pro-workforce is pro-business. And I just want to hear your thoughts on how do these initiatives, which support our workforce and the people who are here, how do they also contribute to a pro-business environment?
Yeah, thank you. That's an excellent question. So first of all, let me just say, the city of Chicago is very much open for business. Now the difference is we're not for sale. I thought that was funny. This is a tough crowd tonight, Jesus Christ. This is no indictment on anyone. Get it? Okay, all right, let's just stay focused here. So I run the largest corporation in the city. It's a $16.77 billion budget. And I can tell you, if your workforce is not happy, this enterprise doesn't work. Whether you are a police officer, a firefighter, an educator, whether you work at the library, whatever you do, it takes workers to run this enterprise. And that's why I've been very proud of the work that we have done to raise wages for workers. Park District workers, do you know that many of those workers had been there for almost 20 years and they weren't making $40,000? How do you live in a growing economy where in the greatest city in the world and you have individuals who are dedicating themselves as public servants are not making $40,000 a year in 2024? And so we raised the wages for our park workers, for our teachers' assistants, and we're going to continue to make sure that when people ask whether or not you support the police department, you can tell an awful lot about how someone feels about someone based upon where their treasure is, because your heart will be there also. Those are the words of Jesus the Christ. And so when we passed the paid time off ordinance, giving workers time off, that actually helps refresh them so that they can be more productive. Believe it or not, to the corporate leaders, I can speak as the executive of this city. Every worker doesn't show up just skipping to work every day. I don't know if that's breaking news to you. Sometimes they actually need time off. As much as I think the work that we do is important, people are not necessarily living and dying by their cubicle. And so we have to create opportunities for them to be recharged. Same thing with your tipped workers. We're talking about an industry that was carrying on the vestiges of slavery. And raising the wages of workers in this industry will actually restore confidence in those workers to actually want to come to work. And we're already seeing that trend in the right direction. Of the 100,000 workers who were tip workers who will receive a raise every single year, the vast majority of those workers are brown and black women who send their kids to the public schools, who drop their children off at their park districts, who are taking classes at night at Malcolm X College, trying to find a better pathway or to expand their horizons. And so those investments are business friendly. The best thing that business or government can ever have is a happy worker. The worst thing that business and government can have is a grumpy worker. And I would just say this, not putting anybody on the spot. My son is 16 years old. He has to go get his state ID because he's been offered a position at the park district to be a lifeguard. I had nothing to do with that. He earned it on his own. So he has to go get his state ID, and he's waiting in line. And he mentions to my wife, he says, "I never want to come here again." I'm sorry, he had his first DMV experience.
Well, it's a universal experience. And I don't think Illinois is any worse than any state.
No, they're not. They do a really great job. So.
Yeah, they actually are more efficient in that new little tiny location than they were when they were
right. He was
down in the basement.
He sure was. He was in and out. He's got his ID. Now he just has to pass his test so that he can earn a living and get out my house.
There you go. Got to light that fire, man. So one of the things that you've talked about a lot when you were campaigning and as mayor is, and it gets back to the Bring Chicago Home, is finding new revenue sources. The city has significant needs just to continue operating as we do. You have a lot of priorities that we want to be able to invest in. And so we're going to need new revenues. So what are your thoughts on some of the revenue streams that have gotten kicked around? What should we be looking at over the next year or two?
Well, I was going to ask you that, Ms. CFO. Well, first of all,
when we put out, said, what questions do you want to ask the CFO and what questions do you want to ask the mayor? Everybody's like, I want to talk to the mayor.
Yeah.
But I'll jump in too.
Well, look, I mean, here's what is very obvious, is that there is a really unique opportunity that we have right now in Chicago. There are so many different forces that are beginning to coalesce. And these are, I believe, natural relationships, unfortunately, that have been disregarded. And what do I mean by that? So let's take the Chicago Public Schools and the Chicago Teachers Union. For the first time, and probably forever, both the system and the workers went to Springfield together to advocate for our public school system. Now, for those of you in this room who may not be familiar with the relationship between the public schools, the mayor's office, and the Chicago Teachers Union, let's just say that band has never been together, right? And so now you have, again, what I believe are very natural allyship that are all speaking in unison and harmony. With the new funding formula that I advocated for in my previous role, the funding formula has made it very clear that we have to have a school district or school districts that are funded based on equity and need and not just on a per pupil basis. The state of Illinois, based upon their own algorithm, their calculation, their funding formula, the city of Chicago is owed $1.1 billion just for our public education system. It's a tremendous opportunity to right the wrongs of the past, where a hyper-segregated school district can now experience or be in a position to create equity and real stability. Why do I use it as an example? So when we talk about other forms of revenue, business, faith, workers, the full force of government, we all have a vested interest in a stable economy. But you also have to have an economy that's fair. That's all people are asking for. And when you talk to people in Chicago, as much as people are, they have anxiety around taxes, and maybe there's a disdain for taxes, most people, when you ask them as shareholders in this enterprise, they recognize that it requires revenue and dollars to run and to operate. And so we have established an entire subcommittee dedicated to revenue ideas. I'm open. I want it to be done responsibly. Whatever revenue idea that we put forward, it has to be done in a responsible way. Having some predictability, whether you are a child care worker or the leader of a corporation, that's what we all want. I want to know that when the 1st and the 16th come around, that I'm going to have enough to be able to respond to the needs that I have for my children, my personal needs. Same thing, corporate, when that quarter ends, you want to make sure that there's enough to make sure that your investment, there's a return on it, and that return is not just on the bottom line, but it's in your workforce, right? So there are many of ideas that have been floated. I put them forward last January when I announced my budget plan. But I will just close with this. Another dynamic that we have to confront, and I know we're working to address this, is our pension obligation. Now, we have been very intentional about making sure that there's some predictability around that payment. It's something that other administrations obviously stopped doing. I'm grateful that the previous administration made a commitment to that, and we're going to expand that and to ensure that to investors and to corporate leaders and then to the families who rely upon their retirement, that we're going to create some stability there. Again, my values are very clear. I don't negotiate my overall values, but the details of how we get it done, that is something that we can negotiate over. And I'm looking forward to working with you and to our partners. But I know you've expressed some innovative, creative things that we can do. And I'm looking forward to having a real open dialogue around those options. Can you all hear Jill? There we go. That's better.
Yeah. We saw in the news about a week or two ago was that Governor Pritzker said that he would be open to sales tax on services. He said he'd been opposed to it before. He thought it was regressive, which we think he's wrong about, but that he would be open to it. And that was really driven by CTA's budget deficit and all of RTA's, all of the transit agencies' need for more funding. I think that's an area where there's opportunities for us to really get our message across about trying to make one of our core revenue sources more equitable by tapping into services which are used far more highly by upper income people and that we're not taxing.
Well, that's absolutely right. And again, that's another example when we talk about what equity and fairness looks like. If the vast majority of your revenue is generated from sales, those who can least afford are the ones who are burdened the most through that formation. Those other services were people who have more disposable income that also want a better, stronger, safer Chicago. When done collaboratively, we can have a reasonable conversation about those particular services, the rate, the progression of those rates, while also providing some alleviation for those families that have historically been responsible for balancing the budget, right? And again, this is what I'm excited about in this moment, is that these are proposals that have been banted about for some time. Again, in my previous role as an educator, as an organizer, even as a Cook County Commissioner, these were things that people thought were, radical ideas, and it turns out they're not, right? I mean, it turns out that services that people want, because they value them, they're willing to put a price on it, right? Being able to have those services available for people who can afford them, and then also be able to respond to this unhoused crisis, to respond to having a more equitable transportation system, response to more behavioral health services. These are things that allow us to create a stable economy and a better world for everyone. This is not myopic. This is just, for me, this is sort of basic fundamental balancing of budgets, that those that have the ability and those who are struggling, there has to be equity in terms of what we're asking for from those particular groups.
I agree 100%. One of the things we've looked at statistics on this is that if you go back to 1950, 60% of consumer spending was on goods. And today, 30% of consumer spending is on goods, 70% of it is on service. So we've shrunk our tax base, and the lower income you are, of course, the more of your spending is on goods and not services. And so, over the years, we've just slowly ended up with a less equitable system. And, it's exciting to see that potentially there might be an opportunity to move in a direction that's more equitable. And as you mentioned, I think you made a really good point about being able to help folks who are spending more money on goods that, if you're expanding your tax base from 30% to 100%, you can lower the rate, right? And so we can be less regressive in that way also, potentially.
Well, thank you for catching that point. There's just a smaller body in which we are able to tax. And this is why these investments for workers is a positive investment. Because again, growing the tax base, providing the level of economic stability and security for individuals who may have not thought about purchasing a home, but now they're in a better financial position. They don't have to work as hard for the ends to meet. Maybe they're going to get, some more certification, more education. As the logistics and manufacturing industry continues to grow, life science and biotech, our top universities, our community colleges that provide opportunities for our Chicago public schools students to receive a free education meeting certain criteria. There is really a lot of room to grow our economy out, to create a stronger, more stable workforce which creates a stronger tax base, which allows for more economic stability and predictability to be more the prevailing form of politics versus the uncertainty and the off balance that unfortunately that has rocked our nation for a generation now.
One of the things, just switching gears a little bit, one of the things I think was talked a little bit earlier on the panel that is a signature initiative of yours is the Cut the Tape initiative. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, yeah, I'm really excited about that. So, the Cut the Tape initiative is something that, when I was running for office and even my experience as a politician, the amount of time that it takes to do business with Chicago has been discouraging. It has literally left money on the table. It has discouraged investment, right? I had to get the sign above my office when I was a Cook County Commissioner. I needed a permit for this signage. It took 18 months for a permit to put my sign over my office. 18 months. This thing sat in my office.
Decided to run for mayor?
That's why I ran for mayor. I'm like, shoot, no one even knows I'm a Cook County Commissioner. I might as well run for something else. And so I thought about that just on a larger scale. If you're, investing, in a big development and you have timber and drywall, I'm just using it as an example, just sitting and you can't move it until you get a permit, that's costing time and money. Now, not having a sign over my office door, did not prevent constituents from finding me. I can tell you that, but this Cut the Tape initiative, I charged and provided an executive order for my chief operations officer, John Robertson. I say, go through every single agency, sister agency, look through all of our departments. Let's see where the log jams are. What are those systems in place that are so antiquated, it's stopping and preventing from development and vibrancy to exist in our city? So I've been brought back lots of recommendations, right? Where things that have historically taken 18 months or 12 months, we can cut it by a third or cut it in half through executive order. Some of it will require me to go before the city council and get a vote on that. There's motivation there as well. Look, at the very least, this Cut the Tape initiative, the whole impetus behind it was to move development and economic investment faster without the arduous experience of doing business with Chicago and the delay that has ensued as a result of it, that has stopped the flow of dollars from coming into the communities that desperately need these investments, that has stopped the flow of investment from happening even in your downtown corridor, that has unfortunately left so much vacancy. That the Cut the Tape initiative is something that is very much in line with when I say that the city of Chicago was open for business and that our efforts to attract the top corporations and investors in the world, I am putting literally, my pen, where my mouth has been. So there's a real unique chance that we have to do it right, and I'm certainly excited about these initiatives that will allow for development to happen and investment to happen without significant interruption.
We had a question that I thought was an interesting one. It kind of gets back to workforce a little bit, but in a broader scale, or maybe I shouldn't say broader, maybe more narrow scale, but one of the questions was asked is, what opportunities exist for promoting more women developers and construction opportunities? Yeah,
that's a great question. So we have our Chicago Women in the Trades. This is, a coalition of women who are in the trades that we are working with to create more opportunities for them to do business. I am right now spending time in high schools all over the city of Chicago, where we are bringing women engineers to engage our young people, but really to show girls of color in particular that there are real opportunities in a variety of industries, which is the unique thing about our economy. Not one particular industry captures more than 14% of our overall, economic prowess, which allows for us to have far more flexibility in how we do business in Chicago. If one particular industry is struggling, it doesn't mean our entire economy will collapse. And so working with women who are attracting more young women into engineering at institutions like UIC, and of course, helping women businesses get certified. to be a part of our minority business and women business enterprise. They can go to our website to find out how to do that. And if there are other women leaders in this particular industry that want to talk to us afterwards, I'm here for a little bit.
Great. I know we're getting a little short on time. A couple things I wanted to hit. Let's talk a little bit about the Bear Stadium and the surrounding infrastructure. There's been a lot of questions about that, and I think, some people said, whoa, wait a minute, like how can the mayor be supportive of the Bears financing when there's so many other needs in the city? A lot of people, I think, criticized and didn't understand, thinking about, again, as an either-or kind of option. So when you think about the Bear Stadium, what are the things that attracted you to being supportive of their proposal?
Yeah, well, there are a number of things. Here's what I said from the very beginning. If any sports team wants to build a stadium in Chicago, it's a very basic criteria for me. Are you going to put some skin in the game? Corporate investment. Will it have the ability for the public to utilize it? And then what is the benefit? So investment, public use, public benefit. What the Bears have proposed is just that. Now, let me take a step back just for about 40 seconds. Right now, the Bears are playing in a stadium that's essentially 100 years old. And even with the remodel, I mean, this is a stadium that is still owed, millions and millions of dollars in debt. Whether the Bears get a new stadium or not, they're still going to have to make some adjustments around the state, the city. All of us will have to make some real serious consideration around how we address, what essentially has not been a true benefit or asset for Chicago. What the Bears have proposed, by meeting that criteria, we're talking about, 72% of that investment is coming directly from ownership. The other 28% from ISFA, which is designed, of course, to build stadiums, simply put. That proposal, believe it or not, was one of the last things that Mayor Harold Washington accomplished before he passed away. That law that created ISFA came in 1987, right for the fall there.
Yeah, I'm going to have to interrupt and say, one thing that's so difficult about working for Mayor Johnson is he knows so much stuff. I'm just constantly amazed at the history, the knowledge that you have. That's a fact that I do not know. So.
Well, there you go. No, you're right. So.
Every time we talk.
Well, I mean, because here's the thing. There's nothing new under the sun, as the Bible would say. I mean, what we are experiencing right now, this is not unique. I mean, in terms of, just sort of the anxiety. What's unique in this moment is that you have more and better synergy around how a corporate partner can be, a responsible corporate citizen. And so what's possible here is that 43,000 jobs regionally through this project, 24,000 jobs just for Chicagoans alone. We're talking about billions of dollars in income, which again creates more of an economic base to grow our economy, to create the type of revenue that's needed to continue to make the investments, right? And so, look, I'm hoping that all stakeholders take this proposal seriously, where more green space will be made available, fields for our athletes in Chicago to participate in. My children just happen to be baseball players and soccer players, and my son, who plays soccer and baseball, has a better shot at having a field that he can play baseball on in the fall than he is in the actual season in which baseball is played. The number of games that have been snowed out and rained out just because we don't have fields, right? Part of this proposal creates an open green space, the opportunity to build more economic vibrancy in this area. It's the #1 tourist spot for the state of Illinois. So having infrastructure there that makes it easier to get in and out, this is the way you create and generate excitement, where people feel that there is public benefit, public use, they want to invest, they want to spend. And then, of course, we can grow our economy, and then it will make my next 23 years in office much easier.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think I'm going to go with one more question. We have a couple of things that I wanted to hit on, but we're running out of time. So quickly, and I know you can't answer this quickly, but one of the questions was, can you expand on your
was that because the question is long, or because you just think I'm long-winded?
No. It's a tough one. Okay. Can you expand on your administration's initiatives to combat crime and guns in the city? It's one of the things the investors said.
Thank you. No, you're right. This is a very complex dynamic. I was just sharing this with some folks I just returned from Montreal, literally this morning, and there are other international groups that want to come and invest in Chicago, and I was just sharing that at the time in which I was in high school, we're talking 800, 900 people were being murdered every single year. I'm probably the first mayor in the history of Chicago, at least in the last 40 years, that wakes up in a beautiful community, might I add, but it is one of the most disinvested neighborhoods in the entire city of Chicago. And on the west side in Austin, we have had our share of violence. Now, since I've been in office, there's been a reduction in homicides and shootings, 15% reduction in homicides. Look, I know there's a lot of work for us to do, but just quickly, one of the things that we are doing very strategically, different than perhaps other administrations, we are zeroing in on where the pain has been the most severe. There are neighborhoods or beats in particular, 35, where 54% of the violence happens in these 35 beats. Garfield Park, Austin, where my wife and I are raising our children, North Lawndale, Inglewood, Little Village. And so we've been hyper-focused in these communities, showing up with the full force of government, crisis interventionists, crime interventionists, showing up with job opportunities, showing up with behavioral health services, streets and sanitation, showing up, just cleaning up the block, the abandoned buildings that are there, the vacancy, right? Just making sure that there's just beautification and we're just being present. In those beats, the most violent beats, we've actually seen a reduction in homicides, 31% and 26% in shootings. Look, it's only been a year. I made a commitment to hire 200 more detectives before the end of my first term. I'm going to accomplish that by the end of this year. We're at roughly 130 detectives. We'll get the next 70. So we're ahead of schedule because we also have to solve violence in the city. One deterrent is not just investment, which is the greatest deterrent. The other deterrent is to make sure that we're holding people accountable. So it's something that is front and center for me. It's top of mind, and building a better, stronger, safer Chicago really requires us to not just invest in these communities, but to make sure that we're strategic about those investments.
Great. Thank you so much. I know we're at time now. I really appreciate everyone who sent in questions. It was so helpful to have those ahead of time, be able to sort through them and have what I hope was for you a very dynamic and interesting panel. Thank you, Mayor Johnson. It's always a thrill to sit with you, not just your knowledge of history, your passion about the city, and what I see when I talk to you, and of course I sit in your office and we talk about policy all the time, that your commitment to the city and to the residents is a commitment that's all-encompassing. And we're here in front of our investor community. We had a lot of members of our business community talk. The way the investments you want to make in the people are investments that are good for business, that are good for our city. And I think that is what's going to have the most impact of any mayor we've had in a long time. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for being here today.
You're welcome. Thank you, Jill, and thank you all for your indulgence.